So we talked about Canada at the 2022 World Cup, and we talked about Canada at the '86 World Cup, which was the first time they played. And we also talked about Brazil being the most dominant nation in World Cup history. But you want to know something? It's weird how all these rules change almost year after year. Qualification changes, the format changes for the knockout stages, and how things go. I'm going to give you a point to point about the formats. This is part 4 of Cutter's World Cup stories. So, this is kind of a weird video. It's like, well, why do you want to know about the formats? Why do you want to talk about them? Well, the simple fact is that not every World Cup has been a 32 team extravaganza like 2022 is offering. There have been World Cups with less than 32 teams. And with 2026 coming up in Canada, US, Mexico, there will be 48 teams to qualify instead of 32, which will make it a little more strange and all that. But I will talk about the formats and what's going on. I will do it as fast as I can, but I got to be in depth. So hopefully you can. All right, so this topic will not be easy to deal with, but I will do my best. All right, so in 1930, the first World Cup was played in Uruguay. Now, things were different. There was no quote unquote qualification. Countries would be invited to compete based on their willingness to get to Uruguay. So a lot of the teams in the 1930 World Cup actually were from North and South America because they were the closest by geographical resources. There weren't too many teams, too many countries that wanted to come from Europe to Uruguay. There would be only 13 teams in the first World Cup instead of 16, so it was invitational. So the groups would be 4 groups of 3 or 4 teams. So logically, you could have a 3-team group or a 4-team group. The top team from each of the 4 groups would face each other in the semifinals, and then, get to the finals. And Uruguay beat Argentina 4-2, so Uruguay was the first world champion. In 1934, there was qualification. 27 countries competed for 16 spots in Italy. Of course, this was when Mussolini was kind of starting to get his power trip. So they managed to get 16 teams. The weirdest World Cup qualification story was 1934. In 34 was the United States and Mexico having to play a rubber match for qualifications in Italy of all places. So the loser had to go to it, leave Italy, go home without even really playing a game. So thus, that's what happened. The Americans won, and the Americans did get to the semifinals. Or was that 1930? No, 1930. So it was a knockout. It was a knockout format in 34, as in there were no groups. It was just 16 teams, one versus the other, 16-8 to 4-2. Italy ended up winning the World Cup, obviously on home turf, impressing Mussolini. Next, in 1938, the tournament was held in France. 21 countries went for 16 spots. Now, Austria was one of the best teams around, and they qualified. Unfortunately, Austria was also under the annexation of Germany. Germany had power over Austria and used its power saying that the Austrians' best players will play for Germany. Matthias Sammer, one of the best strikers around, didn't like that idea and didn't want to play for Germany. He, of course, committed suicide 5 years later. But anyhow, it was a big matchup. So one team got in automatically. And then the 38 tournament, they went back to the knockout stages, so that meant no groups. There would just be straight knockouts, 4 matches. Cuba had one of the most impressive stories. As Cuba tied Sweden in the first game, and then Cuba's star goalie decided to pull himself out of the second game, saying that he didn't think he was going to beat those guys. He was right. Cuba did beat Sweden without him, but he was in net and Cuba got demolished. What's also important to know is the Dutch East Indies, as they were called, as Indonesia was called at the time, qualified but lost 8-0. Of course, World War II would ruin the 42 and 46 World Cup. By 1950, 34 teams would be trying for 16 spots in the World Cup. Now, of course, Germany and Russia, or Soviet Union, as you know, were not allowed to come because of how much they were putting the war and all that. So 16 teams qualified. However, 3 teams, India, Scotland, and Turkey, pulled out. Turkey, I don't know for what reason. India, it was kind of muddled. A lot of people said because the Indian players like to play barefoot and couldn't under World Cup rules that they were upset and basically just boycotted it. That's not completely true. However, most people said that India didn't view the World Cup as anything special. They were looking to do stuff at the Summer Olympics in soccer. Fair enough. And Scotland was one of the worst cases of petulance. In 1950, they qualified. They said that the top 2 teams in the home championships, which had Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and Wales, the top 2 teams would get spots. England qualified first, Scotland second. But Scotland said, if we're not first in the home championships, it's not worth it. So unfortunately, Scotland's petulance cost them a spot in the World Cup. I don't know how they would have done, but kind of dumb, if you will. So that left one group of 2. Uruguay and Bolivia were in one group, and they didn't bother to add a team to Uruguay and Bolivia's group. Uruguay beat Bolivia 8-0 and got to the semifinals because the 4 group winners would move on to a round robin competition. Of course, 1950 is the famous one in Brazil, as the home country Brazilians were looking to win the World Cup. All they needed was a draw against Uruguay. But somehow, in some way, they choked a 1-0 lead, and Uruguay got their second World Cup win. In fact, Uruguay was still undefeated in the World Cup because they didn't compete in 34 or 38. So, Brazil was upset. The Maracanã Stadium went berserk. Over 190,000 fans went home unhappy. And practically the Brazilian team the 1950 team was shunned by society. But one good thing about that was that Brazil changed its color scheme to the bright yellow and blue that we all know today. In 1954, 33 countries would compete for 16 spots. I'm reading that wrong, but anyway, yeah, 33 played for 16 spots in the World Cup held in Switzerland. Same format, 4 groups of 4 teams, so looked pretty good. Now the funny thing is that the World Cup in '54 had a different variety. 4 teams in each group, fine, but 2 of them would be seeded, as in the best teams, and the seeded teams would play only unseeded teams. So that meant that the 2 seeded teams and the 2 unseeded teams didn't face each other, so that they only had 2 group games, which was kind of stupid because that third game could be big. And then they had a simple knockout stages. 4 groups, the top 2 in each group would move on to the quarterfinals. The host Swiss did good, but then beating Austria 7-5 before Hungary got them. And Hungary, who were the Magic Magyars, who went to England, Wembley, and crushed the British team, were the heavy favorites against West Germany. Sadly, though, Hungary blew a 2-0 lead, and Germany won that match. Well, it might have been for Hungary. So 1958 happened, and 16 spots were up for grabs, with 46 countries aiming for them. So 46 turned into 16. The big story was the lack of Italy, as they shockingly didn't make it through, thanks to Northern Ireland or Wales. I can't remember which one. But 1958 also had 1/4 of the 16 teams were the home nations for England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Unfortunately, England and Scotland both would fall by the wayside, whereas Wales and Northern Ireland shockingly got to the quarterfinals, but they both lost. So it was still the knockout of 8 teams. Brazil beat the home country Swedes 5-2 in the final, and Pele scoring that key goal. Then 1962, Chile comes into play as host. 49 countries going for 16 spots. Now the problem was that Chile suffered a massive earthquake in 1960, and people were thinking that they were going to not get the World Cup. However, Charles Ditborn, who was president of the Chilean Football Association, said, "It is that we have nothing that we must have the World Cup." And the organizers agreed. Everyone agreed. So Chile still have the 1962 World Cup. Simple format, 4 groups of 4 teams. And all that. They changed the rules that a tie for first or a tie for second will be broken by goal differential and not goal average. But I still say if a team wins a match and a team ties the 3 matches, it should go to the team that wins automatically. But that's just me. Brazil will go on to beat the Czechs in the final. 1966, it was in England. 51 countries go for 16 spots. And England was happy. They were hosting the tournament. They were doing quite well. There were some major stories. But the big story of qualification was North Korea qualifying thanks to the other team saying, no, we don't want to face you guys. North Korea was purposely put in Middlesbrough, far, far away from the center of England. They were put in a group with Italy and the Soviet Union, if memory serves me right. The plucky North Koreans shockingly beat Italy 1-0 in the final group game, putting Italy out of the World Cup and putting North Korea in the quarterfinals. People were nervous. The English were nervous because of North Korea's presence. And this is 1966. This is not 2022. Anyhow, the World Cup would still be there. North Korea actually shocked everyone by taking a 3-0 lead over Portugal in the quarterfinals until Eusebio decided enough was enough and scored 4 goals in a Portuguese win. Of course, 66 was also remembered fondly for the kind of cheekiness and possible fixing so that 2 European teams would face each other in the final, because both England and Germany got the calls from European referees in their quarterfinals. England and Germany would face each other in the final when Germany scored late in the game to tie it at 2, and they had to go to extra time, 30 minutes, and all that. England scored twice to win 4-2. Of course, that was when Geoff Hurst seemingly scored the 3rd goal, but it just bounced off the crossbar and didn't cross the line. A lot of people said that, I think it was Roger Hunt. If he did diggers in, he would have poached it in the net. Then we would not have any problems. Well, in 1970, in Mexico, 68 countries went for 16 spots. Mexico became the focal point, and North America finally got a World Cup. In 1970, England and Brazil, what they seemingly called the game of the century, which I don't agree with. Brazil beat England 1-0. Could have been worse if Pele had converted his header against Gordon Banks, making the save of the century. England would go on to the quarterfinals, take a 2-0 lead against West Germany, and then blow it. What's worse for England was that Gordon Banks had a Mexican flu or something and didn't play in that. It was Peter Bonetti. What might have been if Banks was healthy. Italy and Germany would go on to have one of the most classic semifinals ever, tied at 2 after 90 minutes. They went to extra time, and Italy managed to beat West Germany 4-3. But Brazil was ready for them, and Brazil tacked them for 1. On to 1974, and West Germany would have 90 teams challenge for 16 spots. This was when East Germany qualified for the first and only time in soccer. And the weird thing is, the 2 Germanys were put in the same group. And East Germany beat West Germany 1-0 by Jürgen Boswager. It didn't affect Germany's chances. Germany went to a better group. But the World Cup organizers decided to change things up. They would have 2 groups of 4 teams. They would have 2 group winners and 2 runners-up in each of the 2 pools, and then the top team after that would meet in the final. Whereas second place in the group, you got a 3rd place match. Germany and Holland won their mini group, whereas Brazil and Poland took second and had to face each other for third place, which Poland pulled it out. Germany would go on to beat Holland 2-1, denying total football a championship. In 1978, 95 countries went for 16 spots in Argentina. And all that. What was key about the 74 and 78 World Cups was that England missed out on both. England had to beat Poland to qualify for the World Cup, but in 74. But England was down 1-0 early. And then they did pull one back, but Jan Tomaszewski, the clown as Brian Clough called him, made acrobatic save after save, and England was out of the World Cup because of that. In 78, they also faltered the World Cup, leaving Scotland the only UK country to qualify. I'll get to Scotland when I talk about Scotland in another World Cup stories. But anyhow, same thing. 2 groups of 4 teams would meet. The top teams in each group would go to the final. The second place guys would go to the third place game. Unfortunately, there was a couple of key moments. In 1978, Sweden was denied a late goal against Brazil because Clive Thomas of Wales blew the whistle. But he said that, he had to. He was counting times, and Sweden was not hurrying. It was Brazil who got robbed against Sweden. My fault. And even though Clive Thomas didn't do another World Cup game as referee, he was proven right. And then Argentina was in the same group with Brazil and Chile. Argentina needed to beat Chile by 4 goals. No, sorry, Peru. Argentina needed to beat Peru by 4 goals to deny Brazil a place in the final because of goal differential. Unfortunately, Argentina won 6-0, and Peru, who shocked everyone by getting out of this group with Scotland and the Netherlands, seemed to lie down and roll, as it will. There was speculation that the Peruvians took a dive, mostly because Argentina decided to unfreeze some assets for Peruvian gang leaders, government officials, and some grain. So that's what happened. Argentina got to the final against Holland, beat them in extra time 3-1. And Brazil and Italy had to play third place. So 1982 popped up. 103 countries go for 24 spots. So the World Cup the officials decided, with all these teams wanting to qualify, we might as well jump some spots. So they went with 24 teams headed to the World Cup from now on. And Spain would be the first World Cup of that nature. So they would have 6 groups of 4. And, the top 2, that makes 12. What are you going to do? I mean, one idea would be to have the 4 best teams, the 4 best group winners, qualify straight to the quarterfinals and have the bottom 2 group winners face the 6, be put in with the 6 second place teams. And all that for a qualifying round for the quarterfinals. But, you can't do the math. So they decided that 4 third place teams, if you're third place in your group, the top 4 out of 6, based on goal differential and points, would join into the round of 16. But for the 82 World Cup, they decided to have 4 groups of 3 teams. So it basically meant that, there would be a 3-team group. Unheard of to have a number in a group. Well, 2026 is going to do the same shit too. But anyway, Spain had a lot of things. And of course, this was the World Cup in which Germany and Austria kind of fixed their match. Germany beat Austria 1-0, but that would be enough for Germany and Austria to qualify for the second phase ahead of Algeria. Algeria was not too pleased with this. However, the World Cup would make a change in 86, which I will get to. After the 4 winners of those groups would go to a knockout, the semis and finals. The semis were huge because one semi saw Germany and France face each other, and unfortunately, Harald Schumacher's leaping tackle at Patrick Battiston, which was not penalized in any shape or form, not even a penalty or a free kick. It was a goal kick. The referee screwed up, It didn't help that Germany won the match in penalties, the first time penalties were held in a World Cup match. However, France would be happy as Italy got the last laugh, beating the West Germans in the final. So on to Mexico 1986. I did kind of explain it in detail in the second World Cup stories. But 110 teams qualified for 24 spots. But there would be changes. For one thing, those pathetic 4 groups of 3 teams would be basically thrown out the window. It would be basically the top 2 teams from each of the 6 groups and the 4 best third place teams would all meet 16-team knockout phase. And they also decreed that all group stage games, that the third and final games would be held at the same time so that it would stop the math calculations and all that. It has worked. So Canada, of course, qualified for the 86 World Cup, but not the Americans, which is funny. But anyway, in Mexico 86, it was all about Maradona, the hand of God goal, which was stupid, but his weaving of the English defense for his second goal was just pure magic. That's coming from an England fan. So the format saw Germany take on Argentina in the final, and West Germany would lose 3-2. In 1990, in Italy, 103 countries went for 24 spots, which was weird. However, there were a couple of exceptions. Mexico, who usually did well in the CONCACAF qualification stuff, actually could not qualify because they had been guilty of fielding some illegal overage players at a youth tournament, so they got penalized by losing the 1990 spot. And Chile tried to use argy-bargy to get ahead of Brazil and get to the World Cup, but they got caught and got subsequently banned from the 94 qualifications. So 1990 happened with 24 teams and all that. Unfortunately, the 1990 World Cup is remembered in a negative way for all the lack of scoring, the goal average being one of the lowest in World Cup history. So it's still a knockout phase and all that. No big deal. Italy shockingly lost to Argentina in the semifinals on penalties. And then Argentina lost to Germany 1-0 on a goal by Andres Brema from the penalty spot. Then comes 94. 130 countries go for 24 spots. So they changed a few things in 94. A win would be worth 3 points instead of 2, and back passing to the goalkeeper would be only allowed if the goalkeeper would kick the ball. Meaning that if you back pass to a goalie, he cannot pick up the ball unless he gives up a free kick. And then that's a free kick to the other team. The 94 World Cup qualifications were one of the most crazy qualifications of all time. That will be for a different video. So every continent had a weird story. So the 94 tournament was held in the U.S., and it still has the attendance record. Well, I mean, when you put it in big college football stadiums and all that, or pro football stadiums, that's what you do. A lot of people thought America didn't deserve the World Cup, but, it was all about the Benjamins, if you will. So the format was still the same with the knockout and the 6 groups of 4. The Americans would lose to Brazil in the round of 16, and Italy would lose to Brazil in the final thanks to Roberto Baggio's miss, and the country just did not let him forgive him. Even though that Baggio was the one who saved Italy from being eliminated in the 94 tournament early on in the first place. So the heads guy, Sepp Blatter, and them decided, after 168 countries wanted to go for the World Cup, they decided to change their minds and add 8 more teams. So now you have 32 teams challenging for the World Cup. Excuse me. So yeah, 32 teams, which would make it a lot easier for qualification. 8 groups of 4, top 2 move on to the round of 16. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. So anyhow, 168 countries went for the brass ring. One of the most interesting stories was Iran qualifying for the World Cup and having to face the Americans in their group. And I think that was kind of on purpose. That's what some people said. It was good to see 32 countries and add more African and North American spots. And this was 98 was Canada's last great opportunity to qualify before 2022 because they were in the final qualifying group. And then Canada fell off the map later. So the French hosted a good World Cup. The hosts French got to the final against Brazil and beat them 3-0. It didn't help that Brazil had the problems with Ronaldo having his seizure and then just playing like zombies all the time. 2002 saw 193 countries go for 32 spots. And this was the first World Cup to have two hosts, so South Korea and Japan. But of course, this World Cup is famous for the fact that South Korea and Japan may have gotten some lucky breaks because no host ever had failed to get out of the group stages into the knockout phase. Well, Japan had a decent group. South Korea actually had a deadly group with Poland, Portugal, and the US. Somehow South Korea qualified. But the big shock was the Americans being the second team to qualify from that group, not Poland, not even Portugal, who were a top 10 team. Portugal shockingly lost 3-2 to the Americans, and they fell flat from there. Korea got some questionable calls in the round of 16 as Italy. I'm not cheering for Korea. Italy got robbed. I will say that. So Italy getting robbed, and then, Spain was upset because a few calls went against them. They could have beaten Korea and got to the semifinals. Of course, Korea would get to the semis, lose to Germany, who would lose to Brazil in the finals. Ronaldo got his redemption from 4 years prior. 2006, 194 countries tried to go for Germany and all that. It was weird to see a country like Togo qualify for the World Cup. Anyhow, 2006 was known for Ronaldo's wink after he kind of got Wayne Rooney sent off. Final, England-Portugal. That's the Portugal soccer team I had personally till 2018. I really had it up for the Portuguese soccer team. Not for Portuguese people in general, because I know a lot of Portuguese people. But that was the catalyst. So I got pissed off. Anyhow, Portugal would then lose to France in the semifinals thanks to Zizou, and then France would then lose to Italy on penalties thanks to Zizou's stupid headbutt. Although, it must be said, Marco Materazzi did provoke him. And the funny thing is, both Zizou and Materazzi were the goal scorers. It was 1-1. That was creepy. 2010, 200 countries went to South Africa, tried to qualify for South Africa, which was amazing. South Africa finally getting the World Cup. They almost got it in 2006, but a lot of people said Germany bribed their way to the World Cup. So South Africa finally gave African teams a reason to smile. But the African teams were not really that great. And South Africa suffered, becoming the first host nation not to get to the group stages, despite the fact they did beat a demoralized French team that were full of petulance and all that. France really fumbled the ball. But what was even more crazy in 2010 was Italy was given a soft group of Slovakia, New Zealand, and I think Paraguay. I can't remember. And Italy didn't even get out of the group. It was like shocking to see Italy not get top two. They were gift wrapped it as the defending champions. Also, kidding aside, Africa almost had a team in the semifinals as the country, as Ghana shocked Americans in the knockout stages and then took on Uruguay in the quarterfinals. And Ghana had a chance after Luis Suarez swatted the ball away with his hand near the goal mouth. Suarez was given a red card, obviously, and Asamoah Gyan, one of the best strikers around, had a chance to score on the last kick of the game to send Ghana to the semifinals. And he missed. It was like, holy crap. Worst part was Uruguay won on penalties. But without Suarez, Uruguay would lose to, I believe, Spain or Germany. To Germany. I think it was to Germany. Yeah. Well, anyway. Not Germany. Germany went out in the semifinals. Went out to Holland, I think. Holland and Spain would meet in a boring final, which saw nothing big, except for Nigel de Jong's karate kick as the Dutchman didn't get sent off. Spain did score a goal to win the game 1-0. Then 2014 happened. 203 countries went for the World Cup in Brazil. And not a lot of shocks in qualified all that. The host Brazilians were looking good, except for the fact that in the quarters against Colombia, Neymar got kneed in the back. And a lot of people were pissed off. Neymar couldn't play in the semis against Germany, and the Brazilians were flat. Thiago Silva was their main captain, but then he got red carded, meaning he had to miss the game against Germany. Let's just say that it was a blowout of epic proportions, and you never would have guessed it. Unless you're a Simpsons fan, because they picked Germany to beat Brazil. But they picked them to win in the final, not the semifinal. So they were kind of off. But anyway, yeah, Brazil got their butts handed them 7-1. And Argentina almost won the game against Germany, but no, Germany scored a goal by Mario Götze. Then the last World Cup, which I will talk about in a different video, is 208 teams going for 32 spots. And 2018 saw two weird qualifying stories, which I will get more in depth with. But anyway, Italy, the United States, and Holland, all very good teams, didn't even qualify for the World Cup or even a playoff to get into the World Cup. Italy was in a playoff against Sweden and shockingly lost that playoff, giving the Swedes a chance to the World Cup. Holland, for how good they seemed to be, fell flat in the group stages, in the qualifying group stages. And the Americans needed just a win against lowly Trinidad Tobago to get into the World Cup automatically. But they didn't even do that. Worst off, Panama and can't remember if it was Costa Rica or Honduras. One of those, I think Costa Rica. Yeah, Panama and Costa Rica both got lucky breaks and won their matches, which meant the Americans couldn't even qualify for a playoff against the Oceania winner. Anyhow, long story short, Portugal and Argentina both were knocked out in the round of 16. It was doomed to be there. Portugal and Argentina, if they both had won, we would have seen Messi versus Ronaldo in the World Cup, but we didn't. Well, Cristiano Ronaldo. The English got to the semifinals, lost in the extra time to Croatia, and then Croatia went on to do well against France in a sense, but the French are the defending World Cup champs. I'll talk about the 2018 World Cup in a different video. And of course, 2022, 206 countries went for 32 spots. Canada qualified, Americans qualified, England qualified, Germany qualified, Portugal qualified. Man, I'm going to have a lot of teams to follow. And 2026, as I said, we'll have 48 teams. 16 groups of 3 teams. And a lot of people think that there's going to be fixing because of the third and final match. But, yeah, that's kind of awkward. I would have wanted either 6 groups of 8 or 8 groups of 6. Or even 12 groups of 4. Because you could have the 12 champion. You could have the top 2 teams in each group. Make 24. And then you would just have possibly you put the top 8 group winners onto the round of 16, and then you make the other 16 teams fight for 8 spots in the round of 16, and then knockout stages and all that. But yeah, they're going to do 16 groups. The top 2 move on, and 32 teams knockout phase. It's going to be a long World Cup. It's probably going to be like a month and a half. I don't know if they have set up when it will happen. But no, they said June and July, but the problem is that But there are rumors that there would be 12 groups of 4. CONCACAF president said they might still consider that. I like it. So anyway, that's all I've got for this video. I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.